Ein Rückblick auf das letzte Jahr bei Turn-On 2017 hat Paul Kalkhofen vom Büro Forster & Partners mit Velux zusammen über die gemeinsame Entwicklung der Velux Modular Skylights gesprochen. Die kommen auch heute vor, auch dieses Jahr ist Velux Turn-On Partner. Wir sind einen Schritt weiter vom Entwicklungsprozess hin zum Ergebnis. Wir haben auch heute einen gewissen Sonderfall in diesem Vortrag, nämlich einen Solo-Vortrag. Es geht darin um Architektur als Versuchsanordnung und Forschungsobjekt, eine Architektur, die in die Zukunft schaut, eine Zukunft, die grün ist und kreisförmig, denn der Vortrag heißt Building a Circular Future, and I'll switch to English for our international guests. Lasse Lind, he's from Copenhagen, he works for one office and two offices at the same time. 3XN Architects and their independent innovation unit GXN. And he will take us to the island of Bornholm and present the Green Solution House. Welcome to Vienna.
Thank you very much. So where do I shift? Is this one? All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Velux Österreich, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm very excited to be here, and it's such a nice space. And as said, this is a follow-up lecture from Paul Kalkhofen last year, and I'll try to show how we in our projects have been working on with the Velux Modular Skylight. But first, a little bit about who we are and the company I represent, 3XN Architects out of Copenhagen. What might be a little bit special about us is that we do, of course, competition and project design. This is our office in Copenhagen, an old boat shed that we refurbished. But also we do research internally, and actually right now we are 18 persons in an office of around 100. Focusing on research. So that differentiates us a little bit. 3XN was founded in 86. Today around 110, 120 employees and 4 offices, main office in Copenhagen and project offices in Sydney, Stockholm and New York. And we are a very international office. We're not just Danes, we are around 20 nationalities. And our home market is mainly Scandinavia, but we do roughly 50% of our work in Scandinavia, but then also 50% of our work outside Scandinavia. And so we work pretty much around the world. Germany, Austria, also one project in Rengasse, and then also a lot of projects now in Australia and Canada and the Americas. We don't have any, let's say, specific typology of work that we do. We do many different types of projects. So what combines us is not so much the types of, combines our work is not so much the type of projects that we do, but I would say more our approach to the projects that we do. And we have, let's say, a very kind of firm belief and a saying within the office that we want our architecture to shape a social behavior within people. Maybe this is something that all architects aspire to do, but we are quite serious about it, and we really try to influence our clients through our architecture in stimulating, let's say, social synergies. This is 2 of our projects that just exemplifies this. One to the left is a music concert hall in Norway that we designed also as a kind of urban stair, so when there's jazz concerts, it doesn't just become, let's say, a house, it also becomes like an urban furniture. To the right, it's a gymnasium, a school that we did in Copenhagen where there's no classrooms, but simply a landscape of let's say, islands and spaces where the students can interact with teachers and with themselves. So kind of a spatial, let's say, breakdown of the classic university building. So GXN, which is where I spend most of my time, is the in-house research and innovation unit of the office. We are around 18 people right now, and we work half of our time on research projects funded by either the EU or the Danish Environmental Ministry or various foundations. And then we do 50% work within 3XN projects or with external clients. And we were basically funded or started on the notion that since the building industry or the demands for the building industry is changing so rapidly, there needs to be a space within the office for some people to actually step out of regular architect work and let's say, investigate other parts of what architecture in the future can be. So one thing we do is we write books. This is 3 of our main publications. One called Cradle to Cradle in the Built Environment, unfortunately only in Danish. One called Material World, focusing on all the new materials emerging in architecture. And then our final, latest one, which is open source for everyone, called Building a Circular Future, also the let's say the title of my lecture today, which is trying to investigate how the industry of architecture, the industry of building, can move from a practice of building something that ends up being waste at some point in the future to actually designing buildings that can become as material banks and continue to keep materials in loops in eternity. Of course, this is a let's say quite difficult thing to do in real life, but fortunately we have one project where we really got to try this out. The Green Solution House on Bornholm, which was done in a strategic partnerships with a series of partners from the industry, among others Velux and the VKR group. And the question we asked ourselves within this group of companies and people was, could we imagine a building as a circular ecosystem, not as just a product, but as a continuous metabolism of ecosystems? So this is the project. It's a renovation of an old hotel on the Danish island of Bornholm. That we designed a new conference center for. So what you can see here in the background is the old building that's been refurbished, and then this fan-shaped building is the new conference center. And what was interesting about this project was that the client is the woman that you see here, Trine. Her business model was, because Bornholm is an island, so it's kind of the outskirts of Denmark. So it's very easy to get people there in the summer when the weather is good. Everyone comes for the beaches. But in the shoulder seasons, no one goes there, and it's a pretty empty place. So what she wanted to do was to attract people to come and do conferences, and for that she needed to attract them with a building that showcased the newest within sustainability. So this was a kind of a sustainability demonstratorium. But what was special about this was that the project was funded by a foundation that has kind of made the deal that all let's say the earnings from the hotel is reinvested into new technology. Because of course, when you build something at a certain point in time, the technology and the products are at that point in time, but they will quickly change. So part of this project is to become a continuous demonstratorium. So it was about 3 things: co-creation, focus on people, and strategic partnerships. And the strategic partnerships was, among others, together with Velux. And as I said, it's a kind of a living demonstratorium that keeps changing. So the name Green Solution House basically comes from the fact that this project was about showcasing green solutions. So we developed 75 green solutions for the project, and I will just go through some of them. One thing that, of course, was very important when you are working on the island of Bornholm, which is a very kind of nice and natural environment, is the daylight and the atmosphere. And we very early in the process were kind of agreeing on using the Velux modular skylight, but we wanted also to have an integration of PVs, of solar cells, as you see in this image, in the ritter light, the skylights of the project. Both to produce energy, but also at the same time to shade from the sun. So it becomes this kind of motif of, let's say, both energy production, solar shading, of course, changing daylight within the project. Another thing we focused a lot on with other partners was material upcycling. What we did, among other things, was to use the leftover products from, there's a lot of glass production on the island. So they have a lot of leftover glass. Together with the dust from granite, which they also produce on the island, we made a landscape waste products, basically waste glass and waste granite dust that didn't use any bitumen, any oil-based product, but only vegetable and naturally based binder. So we called it a bitumen-free landscape to get rid of the oil and also to get a permeable landscape that the water could go down in. Another thing we did was we said we want a complete water and soil balance. That was another, let's say, circle that we tried to establish. And what we did was we said, well, let's design the area around the hotel in a way so when we have heavy rains, heavy floodings in that season, we actually take the water from the adjacent sites to our site and make seasonal lakes. And we don't remove any soil from digging up foundations and so on from the project site, but we just do landscape with it. So there's a water and soil balance. And here you see one of the seasonal lakes that sometimes it's there and sometimes it's kind of wetland biotope. Another element we worked with was the building water. This maybe slightly complex drawing is simply showing that we take all the water from the building usage, from the toilets, from the kitchens and so on, and run it through a biological cleaning process of algae tubes that are standing in the facade. So the active algae are actually breaking down the bacteria in the water, and then we can use it for irrigation of this green wall, flushing the toilets, use it for irrigation of the landscape and the green roofs and so on. So a kind of a circle of the building water, a building that cleans its own water. Another thing we did also with the VKR group was we wanted to talk to material producers about how you could recycle their products in the future. A very important notion in this circular mindset is that we don't know the future, but if we don't design for future generations to actually have accessibility to materials, then they will be in a bad place. So we actually asked all the suppliers for the project, among others, Velfak, the window producer, well, how do you take your products apart? And they, the first time that I talked to them, they looked at me very, very weirdly and said, why are you asking us these things? Why do you need to know that? But after some talk, they actually agreed on looking into this, and this is actually all the parts from a Velfak window. And now they're actually using this as part of their, let's say, branding, that 90% of their materials can be recycled without any loss of value. So even that's not about, let's say, the product functionality as it is, but more of kind of a future scenario of what happens when one day maybe the building is not there anymore to the materials. Another thing we looked at was integrating sensor technology to understand the building better. And finally also looking at the chemistry in materials. What kind of chemistry don't we want inside the hotel rooms? So we utilize the material filter saying these and these chemicals are not wanted, and these are the let's say qualities of materials that we want in the building. This is one product that we found in this process. Is a carpet from a Dutch manufacturer that cleans the air by binding dust particles that are then vacuumed up. So in this kind of search and in this kind of partnership with the Velux and others, we kind of found, let's say, new innovative materials that we then had the chance to utilize in this project. Also developing an app to better understand let's say the water consumption, the light consumption, the air and the energy of the building. And this is some of the things that we're also working with Velux on, actually understanding, let's say, the flow of energy and the flow of water in the building. Finally, looking at the energy for the last part here, we of course integrated PVs and solar heating as part of the building, but and as part of the renovation project as well, but also looking at utilizing the energy from the kitchen waste in a pyrolysis plant, which is basically turning biological material into gas and biochar. So a kind of, this is biochar that comes from this pyrolysis process, and which you can put down into soil. So instead of getting the CO2 up in the atmosphere, you get it in char, and then you can put it in the soil where it belongs. So many kind of, and then you get this kind of circle where you could say the kind of the energy of the building becomes food again, and so on. So many kind of experiments, but all, let's say, focused on the notion that comes from the office that basically architecture shapes behavior. That's a kind of a motto. So all these kind of things are basically, at the end of the day, focusing on people and what it does to people. And the reason why we are saying this, and we are really interested in how buildings affect people, is of course let's say the economy of healthy and sustainable buildings. For example, you could say buildings can improve overall productivity and performance by as much as 12%. So if you look at the economy of that, if people are thriving in a building, if people are feeling well, they will perform much better, study much better, work much better, learn much better. And this is really something that we are getting a lot into at the office right now, understanding this better, getting some data on this, getting some real knowledge on how is the relation between buildings and behavior and well-being. And this is what I will finish this talk off with, because this is also a collaboration that we're doing with Velux of understanding this. So what we are trying to do with the Green Solution House now, because the building is finished, but the experimentation, you could say, continues due to the nature of this product, is to try to establish a feedback loop to get information back from how the building is actually working. So you could say this is the kind of circle that we are trying to establish. Of course, we designed a building, we simulated some daylight factors, some energy factors, some water factors, then we build it, and now we monitor it, and then we actually go back again and see, should we redesign anything? Should we improve anything? So so the kind of the notion of this is that maybe buildings are becoming much more a service than actually a product. So I guess all of you who are architects and others know that a lot of buildings are done as a kind of turnkey thing where you deliver a building and then you're out and you don't really get the chance to work with it continuously. But we actually believe that buildings maybe in the future will be more and more like lifelong relationships, that you are actually, as a provider of architecture, you are providing a service that you then have to maintain in a way. And the way we tried to establish that feedback loop within this project was with the Active House system, the Active House verification system that is also co-developed by Velux and other players in the industry. And it is a system that focuses on energy consumption, comfort, and environmental factors. And it's both used as a kind of early simulation tool. This is two examples from the Green Solution House. You can see to the left, it's the status of the building before the renovation, and to the right, the status of the building after the renovation, where the kind of the parts of the web that are further out is, of course, the best ones. So you get a very kind of visual understanding of the things you do as an architect, and a very measurable understanding. It is based in very kind of real measurable criteria. This is one of the tools that we utilized in the simulation process, the Velux Daylight Visualizer, just to show to ourselves and the client what happens to the hotel rooms when we take away the concrete barrier that used to be on these balconies and replace it with the 50% translucent PV glass. What happens if we put in a Velux skylight and so on, in a very kind of, let's say, easily understandable and measurable way. And a lot of this project is really about the daylight factor. This is the conference hall, which is also daylit, which is fairly unique. I think it's one of the only conference halls in the world that actually is daylit like that, where you do lectures like this in daylight. It's also a challenge with screens and so on, but it's very pleasant. You don't fall asleep during anyone's lecture, so that's good. And of course, the notion behind this, or let's say the big picture, is that actually we spend 90% in kind of modern work life. We spend 90% of our time indoors. 90%. So, I mean, we really need to think about these things. How do we get good daylight? How do we get fresh air? How do we get healthy materials? And this is what we're trying to now measure in the Green Solution House via a series of monitoring entities. So we're measuring the CO2 levels as parts per million, the humidity in the air, the daylight as lux. We're measuring the temperature, and we're measuring the acoustics. So we are kind of trying to understand in numbers how this building is affecting the people using it. This is the data interface that is being developed for the Green Solution House, where you see to the right the measuring points, and you see to the left the impacts on the active house radar. And this is an online tool that the facility management can look at. We can look at it. The producers can look at it. So it's a kind of learning platform, you could say. This is some of the newest data we have. I'm not going to conclude anything on it. Just suffice to say that it's something we are trying to get into, trying to understand what is this kind of living learning lab. How can that help us design something that will hopefully be even better in the future, and trying to let's say tie that into let's say economic parameters of how can you then talk to your clients about if you make this a building that has a really good indoor climate, what's the kind of potential economic value in that. So I will just finish off by saying for us it's really been this project has been a kind of a learning experience of both how to try to engage both companies like Velux, but also the users of the hotel with an agenda on sustainability, and trying to, for ourselves and for everyone going there, to continuously learn and improve how we can build in a more sustainable and circular, holistic way. And just finish off with these two images, just to say that, of course, at the end of the day, all this is about experience. How do you experience the architecture, and in this sense, the daylight, the shift in colors, the shift in vibe, in atmosphere. That's really what, of course, at the end of the day, constitutes architecture. But I think the point for me is that maybe this is getting to a point where we also have to measure it and to be able to argue it to our clients. Thank you very much.
Lasse Lind, for this very high-speed journey into the circular future. I find quite interesting this constellation you have between 3XN and GXN, something like Rem Koolhaas with OMA and AMO also has. I was wondering how the research you do in the one office feeds into the work of the other office.
Yeah, you could say when we do books, for example, we try to set an agenda, so it's not just for, we don't do them by ourselves. For example, the latest book, Building a Circular Future, was with 60 companies from the building sector. So it's an attempt to push an agenda forward, and of course we do that externally, but we also do that internally in our own projects. But I also work, practically half of my time in research projects, and then I work as you could say as an in-house consultant in 3XN projects. So it's an ongoing investigation how we, on the one hand, we are two different companies, but we are the same company at the same time. And sometimes we succeed very well, like in this project where there was both designers and you could say sustainability experts involved from the beginning. And in other projects, we don't really talk so much to each other as we should, weirdly enough, but that's how it is sometimes when things are moving fast. But I think we generally try to, I mean, as you saw maybe in the images, also practical things like we're sitting in a big open office. We're very visible to each other. So we try to move around also. That's a very practical thing, but not sit in the same place, behind your books or whatever, but actually move around in the office. So it's small things like that we try to implement, and we don't want to just be in a box and do research. We want to do projects as well. So yeah.
But it's not like you run across the room and say, "Listen, all our projects have to be circular now," because that's what we discovered.
No, I mean we are trying to push the agenda, but of course we are also let's say reliant on our client. We are not always as lucky with the clients as we were with this one on Bornholm. So at the end of the day, we have to work with our clients, and we always try to argue circular thinking, but often we don't talk about what happens in, let's say, 50 or 100 years, because not that many people care about that actually. But we try to say, well, if you build, let's say, with easy accessible joints, you get a more adaptable, flexible house. That means if it's a commercial developer, for example, if you have changing tenants, it's easier for you to change your fit out, and also you don't have to waste a lot of materials, and those kind of arguments are more easy, let's say, to get through. So yes, we are pushing that in all our projects, but of course in some projects it's more prevailing than others. Yeah.
Coming back to the green solution house and the role of lighting in it, found it quite interesting in your explanation of the house that on the one hand there's a lot of software involved and analysis of the environmental factors, and I was wondering how does the hardware change if the software changes, and how does lighting change from the modern paradigm of just having light, air, and sun, and that's it?
It's a good question, and I was also just talking to the guys from Velux before about this. Of course, you know as an architect that if you put a window in, more daylight will come. You don't need, let's say, a visualization for that. But what it can actually teach you, these kind of tools, or it can give, let's say, a common language for everyone working on the project, a common understanding of how much are the parameters actually affecting. And I think it's also a pretty good tool in terms of talking to your client and to the engineers of saying, well, you know, what are the levels we want? And you get kind of more quantifiable numbers. So in a sense, it doesn't necessarily change the design practice, but it informs it, I would say. It informs it at the right time. So you get the kind of the right knowledge to take the decisions you need. Yes, that would be my answer. Yeah.
You also mentioned the term design for disassembly, where you can basically take apart the house ideally and put it somewhere else again. So I imagine that also involves change of thinking in architects, because in architecture you want your house to be permanent. You don't want it to be disassembled.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and I'm definitely not arguing that you should build something that should just be taken away. I mean, but I think all architects, when we design something, we imagine that it will stand for 500 years and everyone will love it. And of course, that's what we hope. But the fact is just that we don't know, and we don't know the future. So, and I think a very good, let's say, example of designing for flexibility and disassembly could be, like, say, all warehouses. There were warehouses, then demography changed. They became creative, lofts. Then they became offices. Then they became apartments. And you don't have to tear everything down and throw everything away and make it into road fill. But if you look at buildings from just the 70s in Denmark, that everything is glued together, everything is casted together. You cannot separate any light parts from the main structure. So if you have to change anything, you have to take it down, and then you can make it into a road. And all the value accumulated in that building is gone. So that's basically the concept, that we should kind of relearn how to make buildings that are adaptable. And in that kind of process, a very important tool is thinking about, now I'm putting something together, which I hope will last for a very long time. But in the case that someone has to take it apart at some point, how would they actually go about doing that?
So it's also an awareness of the single parts of a building, but also how they are connected to
exactly.
each other.
It's very much about the connection. And it's also very much about understanding a building not as one thing, but as a series of lifetimes. I mean, obviously, if you look at the foundation, has a much longer lifetime than a floor or other parts of a building. So it's also just about kind of, I think, nurturing that understanding that a building is not one thing. It's a series of metabolisms and a series of lifetimes, basically. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for opening our minds.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me.
Ja, mit diesem Ausblick endet unser Tag heute. Herzlichen Dank fürs Dasein. Es geht morgen um 13 Uhr weiter mit Turn On, Wohnen, Kultur, Bildung, Freizeit und Verwaltung. Ein großer Reigen an interessanten Projekten. Die Talkrunde, Turn On Talk und der Schwerpunkt Belgien. Dankeschön.